Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of ClevrChat. And I'd love to introduce Ben from Zoom, one of our technology partners. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Dave. Great to meet everyone. Looking forward to the chat today.
Perfect. I'm really excited. So, we're going to be talking specifically today around public sector, a vertical that I work really closely with, and more specifically, one of your strengths, Ben, local authorities, and what we can do with technology in that vertical. The first thing we can look at, and it's the same across the board, local authorities are being asked to do more with less than ever before. What do you see at Zoom with councils struggling to do the most right now?
It's a really good question, actually. And you're right. I think more for less is probably the mantra that I'm seeing across local authorities in every conversation, essentially, is how we can get those efficiency gains that allows us to kind of meet those ever increasing service demands on ever decreasing budgets. And how we're seeing that play out with a lot of conversations today, particularly around the customer experience side of the portfolio. So, for example, things like virtual agent. So the idea being and looking about how we can automate those engagements, how we can look at containment through AI, and how we can prevent and reduce cost of contact, essentially. That in itself, though, does bring inevitable challenges for local authorities. So one of the things we hear time and time again, actually, is particularly with virtual agent, when you're looking at those high volume, low value engagements and looking at automation, what happens to those demographics that may not necessarily feel comfortable using online services, those demographics that may feel either aren't IT literate enough to be able to kind of make those kind of engagements and utilize the technology, or may not even have access to those who are kind of digitally excluded. And it's very often it's those demographics that have the most need and for council services and council support.
That's a really good point, and something that we've seen in our customer base. As you push towards digital services, councils absolutely can't afford to lose that human side of resident support. And for me, where we look at AI, we look at digital agents, we can automate the simple elements and the bits where people contact frequently, and then actually have physical members of staff available for talking to those people that don't have access to technology, or they're kind of technologically impoverished. How do organizations balance both?
Yeah, I think it's the age old question, isn't it? Around kind of where do we automate, but where do we make sure we can keep that human connection? So Zoom are addressing that in a couple of ways. So one of the things we're looking at the moment, and speaks to a lot of local authorities around, is around providing touch points in physical locations. So the likes of video kiosks in kind of community centres, libraries, etc., which mean those people who may not feel comfortable using automated processes still have access to council services, can still look to kind of, and equally can be supported by human agents as part of those engagement touch points. The other
That's a
thing
really good. That's a
sorry,
really good shout. Sorry, Ben. That's also going to help people that don't have access to a smartphone, isn't it?
yeah,
With the kiosk technology, that's a smart device that's available in areas where there's high footfall.
yeah. And it lends itself as well to kind of different channels. One of the things we're hearing from local authorities is how they support organisation or their residents, should I say, in reaching out to them and the channel that they want to reach out to them, not being kind of dictated to by technology. But inevitably, there's always kind of preferences based on demographic, age range, etc. But equally, there's channel of choice based on what you're trying to achieve. So if we take the video kiosk as a great example, if you're from a elderly demographic that may not necessarily kind of want to access or be that comfortable using web services, being able to go to your library or your community center, using a video kiosk and having someone on the other end be able to talk you through potential application form, annotating various parts of that to say what you need to fill out is a really powerful way of making sure that you're still supporting those residents that most need it.
Yeah, that's a really good shout, and that could be video even, couldn't it? So the residents could actually be talking to somebody face to face through that kiosk.
Exactly that. And I think the key here is it's not using AI not to remove the human touch, but to support and supplement it effectively. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And AI is everywhere now, but how many councils are truly adopting it? Do you see this now becoming more and more frequent, or are many councils still trying to work out where best this technology could fit?
I think there's a danger in the industry that we work in, Dave, where AI become a bit of a buzzword. where it's used a lot but means very little. And I think that the concern is for most local authorities that actually AI is only valuable when it has practical use case and implementation. So one of the things we really focus on at Zoom is ensuring that the AI is being delivered for specific use cases within local authorities to deliver real value rather than just AI for AI's sake. And I think by delivering it that way, what we're seeing from a lot of local authorities is the understanding of where it can add value, not only for at a high level from a strategic IT point of view, but also at that end user demographic as well, where they want to see well, how is this going to improve my day-to-day life in terms of the job I'm doing as well. And I think when you get that right and you get the messaging right and they can see the value it's going to add day to day for themselves, but equally for the residents they serve, I think that's when you really get that kind of pull through in terms of kind of the momentum towards delivering AI across that kind of customer experience and resident experience.
That makes really good sense. And certainly for us, where we're talking to our customers about AI adoption, it is that low hanging fruit, isn't it? It's the touch points that a resident would use that are the most frequent, but also the most simple. So it could be, I don't know, as examples, asking what day the bins are going to be collected at Christmas, or learning what time your local leisure centre is open over a bank holiday. Have you got other examples of simple workflows that AI can work with very very easily?
Yeah, there's a couple I can think of. So I think it's a really good chat. The kind of ones you've called out, which are the typical ones we see on a day-to-day basis, which is one is the frequently asked questions. So how
Hmm.
often do you call up your local authority just to actually find out something that's probably on the website? And in those scenarios, we're actually able to point the chat bot and indeed the voice bot to the website as a knowledge base to be able to answer those kind of frequently asked questions, hopefully prevent the need for expensive cost of contact for local authorities where they're getting through to an advisor to answer something that potentially they could have found out for themselves. But we're taking that one step further to the kind of the agentic approach now and use the kind of the misbins kind of piece as as an example of that. So not only telling people when their bin should be collected, but perhaps if their bins have been missed, creating tickets in back office applications to ensure actually rather than having to speak to an advisor on the phone, that kind of workflow could be completely automated and contain the need for the engagement. I think a great point though, and it lends itself to Dave, what you were saying before about not forgetting about the human engagement. I think the natural consequence of having that high volume, low value engagement being automated and kind of being manually kind of self-serve is the inevitable consequence of that is that the stuff that's typically getting through to an advisor or a human agent is going to be more complex,
Hmm.
more personal, require greater empathy. And then you take AI from a different lens then, which is how can we then use AI to support a more human engagement? So how can we then use it to support an advisor to be able to really focus their time and attention on the resident and kind of minimize some of the administration that's often involved in some of those kind of advisor roles in terms of disposition, wrap up, taking notes, summarization. How can we simplify that to allow them to really focus on what's important, which is that one-to-one human engagement?
I think that's a really, really good point. And it's actually a different vertical, but something I've been looking at in healthcare, where having technology, being able to take the transcription, being able to highlight any elements in spoken word where people are genuinely struggling, it means that the agent can actually focus on the conversation, knowing that data, that note taking, all of the background tasks are being completed. And I think that's really, really important with this technology.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think if you look at as well for most local authorities, particularly churn, so you look at the members of staff that sit in that team, and it's a really difficult job that they have to do. They deal with quite a real breadth of services, not often being asked the same question twice. And what you often find are there'll be pockets within each kind of contact center or an advisory team that effectively are 15, 20 years experience to become the oracle to pretty much every question that needs to be asked, which is great. And that knowledge is really important, but equally it makes it really difficult when you look at onboarding new staff or trying to train people and kind of help them, support them. So anything you can do to simplify that process and some of the stuff you talked about there in terms of transcription, summarization, but equally providing them relevant information. So using knowledge bases to be able to provide context to questions that are being asked at the time is really helpful in terms of getting people up to speed. So you aren't overly reliant on that person who's been involved for 20 years and knows the answer to every question.
Do you know what? That's a really good point, and something that we've looked at with some of our customers, where there can be multiple different routes in, or a number of specific contact centers doing different jobs. With this technology, you can look at that one number, that one way of contacting a council, and then tasks being dealt with by a single contact center, and really centralizing the skills and the knowledge into where it's needed most. And it gives that consistent level of service, doesn't it? Where it's clear what time the contact center's open, it's clear how to contact, and you're not being pushed from pillar to post to get things responded to.
Completely, because what used to be kind of someone tabbing through 20 different applications in order to get the answer needed now becomes presented to them at point of contact. It's really interesting. Before I joined, before I got into space, there was a whole view that like single view of customer or single view of resident was really important. Like you needed to know everything about that resident when they called in. What I'm hearing time and time again is that actually that's not as important. Often that can be that view of everything, every engagement that resident has with the council can be overwhelming for an advisor. What's way more important is exactly what you were talking to, which is contextual information, i.e., what do I need to know based on what the conversation I'm having at this point in time? And some of the stuff we're doing around integration to back office applications means that inevitably we can bring the right information based on the context of the conversation, as opposed to just a screen pop that shows you everything we know about that resident and every time they've called us.
I think that's a really good shout. Here's a curveball. Everything that we've spoken about so far has been positive. What are the biggest mistakes councils make when approaching digital transformation and AI?
It's a really good question. I'm always ready for one of your curveballs, because you don't. So, but basically, one of the things we see, and I think this is probably speaks to the importance of partners such as yourselves, CloudClevr, though, is that any digital transformation journey isn't a kind of one and done, for want of a better term. It isn't about delivering a day one and then moving on. I think the reason for that is that actually there's so much value comes from the understanding the data and metrics that come out of that kind of initial deployment as well. So whenever we talk about local authorities, we very much see it as a partnership approach. And I know that's definitely the case today for CloudClevr as well, which is the view of we work with you side by side throughout the entirety of that journey, from beginning to end of contract. And the reason for that is taking that iterative approach. I think often local authorities can see this is one big project. We need to read the elephant hole, for want of a better term, and kind of, but that can mean sometimes nothing gets delivered because there's always often kind of barriers in the way. There's problems that come up. There's integration challenges, etc. What we think works far better in this approach is working closely with your partner, understanding kind of what is the low hanging fruit that could be utilized to try to kind of get best value, learning from that, taking the data, delivering a minimal viable product, and then kind of taking that information you gain from that, from the metrics, analyze that data, and then continuing in an agile way, make those improvements alongside kind of those required changes once you understand the data, essentially.
I think that's a really good shout out. We've tended to see the same thing where you look at a phased rollout, and you can pick those, talked about it before, the low hanging fruit. We can pick those elements that we can easily automate, and then balance the human element and those parts as we push through. What would be your advice to the councils that want to adopt AI but don't know how to balance it?
It's a really but where I've seen it be really successful, and we've got a number of examples across local authorities, Oxfordshire County Council, Buckinghamshire Council, the likes of Harlow, who look to drop this approach, is essentially, if we take virtual agent as a great example of kind of this approach, is looking at things like frequent asked questions first. So the ability to kind of answer those, using the website as a knowledge base, those questions that are commonly being asked time and time again, that are taking a valuable resource within staff kind of capabilities as a piece. Understanding that, reviewing that, using the website, as I said, as a knowledge base to address those, but making sure there is always an escape path to speak to you. I think that the challenges for most of these organizations, and it's a personal bugbear of mine, is that kind of AI loop that you can get into, where effectively you go round and round, not getting the answer you want, never able to speak to an actual real person, and then inevitably kind of end the engagement completely frustrated about the experience you just had.
then
Yeah.
potentially call back in and think if you ask the same questions again, you're going to get a different result. I've been in exactly the same place with other kind of voice based IVRs. So that's absolutely right. That there's got to be that off ramp, hasn't there, to physically talk to somebody that can help if the AI element hasn't worked. I think that's a really, really good shout. In terms of councils that you've worked with that have got this right, and I know you just talked about Oxfordshire as a reference, have you got some examples of councils that have got this right? And what's changed as a result? What does good look like? What does success genuinely look like for the residents and for the frontline teams servicing those relevant residents?
It's a really good question, and yeah, I think there is kind of a couple of examples where I can point to where I feel like this is AI done well, for want of a better term, essentially. So let's look at Oxfordshire again. We'll take them as an example, and you've referenced the voice IVR piece that you mentioned there and the frustration around that. I think that's way more apparent within local authorities. So
Hmm.
if you look at kind of how most people engage with local authorities, and I can speak from my own personal experience, it's very rare that I have to call the council. There'll be certain people who have to call the council regularly based on the service that they receive, but for the vast majority of the residents, it could be once every couple of years that you have to call them for whatever reason that might be. The challenge you have for most local authorities is that if you call a typical IVR, you may know the outcome you want, but you may not know how that works from a structure in a service. And like, for example, adult social care. So you may know that you need to have a stairrail fitted, but you may not necessarily know that's to do with adult social care. And the challenge that Oxford found with that was that people were going through the standard IVR menu, ending up in the wrong place, which ended up being transferred calls, so really poor customer experience, but equally was taking up time and effort for individuals within that to understand the requirement, transferring it to the right department, then repeating the requirement that they had as part of that approach. How Oxfordshire addressed this was by delivering virtual agent voice as part of the IVR now. So if you call up Oxfordshire County Council today, you will speak to a virtual agent voice bot who will ask you questions about what you want to achieve, what the outcome is. And because it understands the context of that, can then route you to the relevant person as opposed to that traditional IVR menu where it's press one, speaks to council tax, press two. The outcome they've seen of that is that they've had 50% reduction of calls to switchboard, which means that then they've had a reduction of transferred calls internally. The outcome of the resident is it's a much smoother, better experience. My view of the world is, and I think it's shared by many, is that I don't mind speaking to a virtual agent voice bot. I don't mind having a virtual agent engagement with chat, as long as I'm getting the outcome I want from that engagement. I'm in a place where actually the outcome's more important than the interaction, essentially. And I think the feedback they've had has been really positive. The other outcome of this is the cost saving. Every time they're transferring that call internally, there's a cost to serve associated with the time taken for that member of staff, one, to understand the challenge, and then two, to pass it on to the relevant person as well. So I think there's multiple outcomes of positive delivery of AI, which is greater resident experience, cost saving, but equally a better experience for staff as well.
I think for me, and they were all brilliant points, Ben. I'm going to take it away slightly from AI and actually talk about Zoom itself. An example of a customer of mine is Suffolk Council. The thing that really, really stands out as to where we are now with the technology is that we've trained the customer. They're up to speed and able to look after these systems themselves now. And what I think, certainly the thing that is very, very right now is, technology changes. Zoom do an awful lot with development, and my customer's at a point now where he looks forward to new release notes and technology changes as much as we do. And the bit that I absolutely love now is that the customer can make changes and deploy new features themselves because, AI looks and feels complicated, and telephony and unified comms always has been. The thing I love with Zoom is actually how straightforward it is to make these changes on the fly. So we and our customers can bring in new features and new functionality really, really quickly. And I think being able to pivot and be proactive without having to wait for a support partner to make those changes is something that stands out for me as well. So, I love the technology, but I also love how easy it is to make changes as and when required.
I think, Dave, that's a brilliant point, to be honest with you. And I think, yeah, it's probably what I should have kind of led with, because I think for me, there's a view that actually, particularly when you look at kind of the resident experience, the need to be agile for an organization is really important. So actually the
Mm.
ability to be self-sufficient in terms of being able to make some of those changes. But then equally, I think, and what CloudClevr have done a really great job with is that in order, you need to be enabled to allow yourself to do that. So it's almost you work hand in hand with the partner to kind of understand how you deliver that from an administration point of view. But then equally, you get given the keys to be able to kind of make those changes and feel self-empowered to do that yourself as well. I think one of the things we see, and it lends itself to the point you're making about where do we see digital transformation fail, is actually that's a key part of this. This shouldn't be top down being pushed upon people. This should feel like very much ground up momentum coming from the end user who's seeing the benefit. And that equally applies to the administration of the platform as well. If they feel empowered, they feel able to make the changes they want to do, they can see the benefit they're bringing in terms of the changes they're making to the platform as well. That momentum really helps with those digital transformation projects.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely right. We're running out of time. A couple of final points. Ben, for a council leader listening and watching this podcast, what do you think they should be prioritising in the next 12 months?
It's a really good question. I think we're heading into a period within local authority of change that we haven't seen since like the 70s, with obviously the introduction of LGR, etc. So there's two schools of thought around that, or what I'm seeing across local authorities is one, the organisations that decide actually we want to make strategic change to our organisation, hopefully spearhead whatever the new world looks like when it comes to LGR and what those unitary authorities look like. And there are those authorities that are kind of understandably kind of waiting to see what happens post the dust settling and stuff. We've been working with a number of organizations at the very early stage that have made the announcements yet. And I think the ones that are really excited and seeing the benefit are the ones that are taking that kind of the first approach of being strategic, forward looking about what the new world could look like and how they can influence it. There's a really short window between now and kind of vesting day for most local authorities. So I think those that, to your point around the next 12 months, are prioritizing change, understanding what only how they can benefit now, but equally how they can future-proof themselves moving forward to that new world as well, are the ones that are going to really thrive once that kind of LGR decisions are being made.
I think that's a brilliant point. And I'm looking at the clock and we're almost, I think, 20 minutes in, and we hadn't mentioned LGR, which really surprises me. But again, from our side, the thing that stands out really, really strongly with these cloud technologies, with Zoom, with our integration partners, is how easy it is to integrate systems and solutions and expand these solutions. And if we're looking at LGR and unitaries being formed, it's very, very straightforward to expand these solutions, bring in additional services. And I think that's something that massively helps on a cloud platform like Zoom.
Completely agree. And I think one of the things we've been really kind of mindful of, both from a commercial aspect in terms of how we support commercially kind of consolidation of those accounts, but even from a technical aspect, the thing to bear in mind is, and we've touched upon it briefly, like line of business applications across local authorities, there's no end. Like if you look at one council independently, they'll have multiple niche applications delivering certain line of business services. When you look at LGR, they're going to have 3, 4 different organizations all coming together, all with duplications of those same applications across the. So one of the things we see as a real benefit from Zoom is the open approach to our platform, the open API, the ability to integrate with those multiple applications, not being a closed ecosystem. So come vesting day, we can look to working with partners like yourself to integrate those applications into the existing solution and ensure that when the 1st of April comes or when vesting day happens for those organizations, they're in the place where actually it's immaterial kind of where the data sits, because it's all being presented to the advisor as a contextual piece of information based on the conversation they're having with those residents.
Absolutely right. It makes training more straightforward and it makes engaging with the residents so much easier, doesn't it? I think that's really important. Final question, and it's going to be a difficult one, but we'll put our kind of
Prepared.
thinking hat on. Um, what is something that councils are still doing today that will look completely outdated in 3 years?
Okay. Really, really, really good question. I think like inevitably, I think I go back to the point I made about the two organizations we're speaking to at this moment in time, which is The belief that as is good enough, I think, is a real problem sometimes, kind of across local authorities. They're doing nothing and kind of focusing on kind of protecting and maintaining the as is a real challenge. I think inevitably, if you look at kind of the direction of travel for most local authorities, isn't sustainable. If you aren't looking at investing in AI, if you aren't looking at kind of the benefits that technology can bring across the board of all the service and operational deliveries that you've got, inevitably in 12, 18, 24 months time, you are going to be left behind. But equally, you're not going to be able to support the same level of services you do today based on the budgets you're going to have. I think anyone who isn't reaching out to the partners, the market, to understand what the capabilities are of AI today are definitely going to see themselves struggling in 12, 24 months time.
I agree. And from my perspective, and it's actually going back to a point I made earlier, I think something that will be very different in 3 years' time is making changes at the moment to communications platforms. Organizations are having to wait for their system integrators, their legacy partners to be doing these changes for them. And, you know, as much as I love talking to our customers, I love helping drive strategic change. I think something that will be less required then will be waiting for us to make the change for one of our customers. We're going to make sure that their IT departments, their customer facing staff, their customer experience teams can make these changes on the fly and react to the needs of their residents more quickly. And for me, I think that's going to be the big change. Wonderful. Well, that's the end of ClevrChat today. If anyone's interested in anything that we've been talking about, please do get in touch. You may be lucky enough to jump on a call with myself and Ben or anyone else in the team, but absolutely do get in touch. And as CloudClevr and working with our key partners like Zoom, we'd be absolutely delighted to see what we can do to help with that integration and guide these organizations towards and through LGR.
Really enjoyed the chat. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Ben.